Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. First of all, happy Halloween. I'm going to talk about a topic today that is surprisingly controversial, opening a video game museum. Now currently there is only one big, fully stocked, fully operational video game museum in the United States. That's the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas. There's also the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, but that's just a general toy museum that has a video game section devoted to it. But it's huge. It's nice, really nice as well. So beyond that, there's really not much in terms of video game museums. But I do know 3 hardcore collectors that have been talking about opening a video game museum for years, and varying parts of the country. Now, what's going on here is a lot of collectors are getting up into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're wondering what to do ultimately with their collection, or maybe they just don't want all that stuff in their house anymore, or maybe they're just tired of collecting maybe, or they just want to, they have an incredible collection and they just want to share it with the community at large, with the gaming community at large, with the country at large, or whatever. And so all perfectly valid reasons for opening a video game museum compared to other popular pop culture things. Their video games are very underrepresented in the museum community. Now, it's odd. So several people I know, like I said, 3 people I know have talked about opening a video game museum. And it's been kind of controversial because, they might mention it a few years ago and people are wondering, okay, where's your museum? Show it to us. You're never going to have a museum, whatever. Now, opening a museum of any kind takes years and years and years, especially something like a retro gaming museum, since there's so few of them. Cities don't know what to expect. So let's go through this. Now, before I tell you what it takes to open a video game museum, let me tell you my credentials real quick. Now, these aren't bragging points or anything. Nobody's going to be impressed by this. I just want to tell you why I'm qualified to talk about opening a video game museum. First of all, I've been writing for Antique Week for over 10 years. This is a national publication, and I've been writing about museums for the publication forever. I've interviewed many museum curators and just people that worked at museums, people that host exhibits and things for all kinds of exhibits, all kinds of museums. So I've been doing that a very long time. I'm also good friends with the guys that run the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Joe Santulli, Sean Kelly, John Hardy, good friends of mine. I've interviewed them as well. I've talked to them about, opening their museum and what it took. And so let's talk about it real quick. What does it take to open a video game museum? First of all, you have to amass a huge collection over many years. The National Video Game Museum guys had all been collecting since the 1970s. And, obviously, they had tons and tons of stuff to put in the museum, and so it takes a really long time, and it's very expensive over many years to build a collection worthy of putting in a museum. You also have to solicit donations, whether it's donated games or donated money to buy games or whatever. Now, the National Video Game Museum guys, for years and years, they traveled all over the country, setting up at video game conventions and other events, taking donations, taking game donations, financial donations, or whatever. And, they had a traveling exhibit for years and years, publicizing their future museum and, getting donations. Many years they did that for a long time. So, anybody, in the planning stages of opening a museum, that's what they're going to have to do, and it's going to take a long time. Another thing, once you've amassed this huge collection, if you don't want it all in your house, you're going to have to find a place to store it. And you've got to have containers, really good containers to store all this stuff, because a lot of this stuff is cardboard and plastic and electronics. You need really good containers, that are maybe sealed or whatever, just to keep this stuff in really nice condition, to keep it in, museum-worthy quality. And, that's not cheap either. Then you need to decide what kind of museum you're going to have. Is it going to be very interactive where people can play a lot of the games? Are you going to have an arcade within the museum like the National Video Game Museum does? You're going to have consoles and computers set up on free play, that kind of thing. I would highly recommend that because people love interactive museums. These days, You know, modern museums are very interactive. It's no longer enough to just, you know, have a building, put a bunch of showcases in there and fill it with, you know, relics and just have people come to look at it. People expect activities, like, you know, things you can do, things for kids to do. So another type of museum is a research museum. Is your video game museum going to have, you know, boxes and boxes of magazines that people can check out? Is it going to have, you know, documents people can look at? Are they going to be able to play each individual game and have the instruction manual to check out and that kind of thing? What kind of museum are you going to open? Again, all this stuff takes years and years. One thing that I highly recommend is to visit other museums, at least 20. Go all over the country visiting different kind of museums, in particular pop culture museums. Not only can you get a good idea of what to, you know, you'll get some good ideas for your museum, you can talk to the people that work there and that kind of thing. Just you know, really do your homework, travel, check out other museums. Now, you've also got to do market research. You got to come up with a financial plan. A museum is not a hobby like game collecting. A museum is a business, whether it's nonprofit or not. You have to come up with a financial plan. You have to do your market research. Another thing, you have to find investors. It's not enough to have a massive collection and a, you know, most retro gamers, the vast majority, maybe all, don't have Mark Cuban money or Bill Gates money. You have to find investors. The National Video Game Museum in Frisco was fortunate enough, you know, they obviously have investors. Randy Pitchford, who owns Gearbox Games, is based in Frisco, where the museum is, and he was a, you know, ardent supporter and a huge donator to the museum. And, you know, finding donors is extremely important, very essential. And speaking of Frisco, you have to find the right city. Now, the National Video Game Museum guys went all over the country talking to people in New York and California and just all over the place, Seattle, looking for the ideal place to put the museum. So many cities didn't get it. A video game museum, what is that? They were just sort of foreign to the concept, and finally they Frisco, Texas, which is north of Dallas, that city was they got it right away, the guys said. And the mayor of the city was a huge gamer geek from way back, especially with computers, and just the city got it. They got the idea of it. It's a growing city with a lot of money. They invested heavily into the museum. Frisco got it, and that's why the museum is in Frisco, Texas. That and because Gearbox with Randy Pitchford is located in Frisco. Once you find a city you think where you may want the museum, you have to meet with city officials. It's exhausting, and it takes years and years to start a video game museum. So people that are super impatient with some of these people that have mentioned wanting to build a video game museum, to establish a video game museum, give them time. It takes decades, literally. And once you even have your collection, it still takes years to you know, get all this in place. You have to find, once you find the city and you know, city officials that are amenable to the idea, you have to find an affordable location. A location that's easily reached, that has plenty of parking, that's, you know, maybe centrally located or in the museum district, or that's just an ideal place to put this. Whatever the case, there are a lot of factors to consider. In general, there are many, many, many things to consider. The National Video Game Museum, in the years leading up to their opening their museum in Frisco, they had, even though these guys were well respected in the in the industry, even though like Joe Santulli had been publishing the Digital Press website or fanzine forever and hosting the Digital Press fanzine, and Sean Kelly's a video game store owner, John Hardy, all these guys ran the Classic Gaming Expo for years. Even though they were well respected within the industry, they got tons of trolls coming at them. You know, where's your museum? When's your museum? When's it going to open? Where's it going to be? For years and years, they asked this very critically, very cynically. You're never going to open a museum. This is just a ruse to add to your own collection. You're going to pocket this money. They got lots of trolls. And one troll in particular, once they actually opened the museum, one guy was very amusing. He, unintentionally so, he said, "You guys don't have the first video game museum. I've got a video game museum in the back of my store. I've had this for years." Now, I'm not talking about Game Over video games, because obviously owner David Kalin is smarter than that. They've had museums in the back of their stores for years. This was another guy that had his little store museum well after Game Over, but he thought he should be credited with the first video game museum and not the National Video Game Museum. Amusing, because he just has a few systems and things in the back of his store. Doesn't really count. Anyway, So the bottom line is, if you know somebody or if you've heard about somebody wanting to open a museum of any kind, just know that it takes years and years and years, tons of planning, tons of money, tons of donations, on and on and on. All right, guys, thank you so much for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I appreciate it. Just click that little red subscribe button below the video to your right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you guys later.